So if your dog gets a fecal test and there's some levels of Giardia, are they supposed to have Giardia and then they can have too much? Or Giardia, they should not have any of that in their system and it's contagious to other dogs? And
so what it comes down to is most fecal samples, we're looking for two different things. We're looking to see the actual organism present in that sample, and then we're also looking for an immune response of the body to indicate that it's been exposed to a variety of parasites within maybe the previous 3 months. If we see the actual organism in the sample, like say we see Giardia in the sample, it does mean that the dog has the Giardia organism. It means he sheds the Giardia organism, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that dog will be symptomatic for it. Because again, everything that we see with an infectious organism is highly dependent on how the individual's immune system reacts to it. So it is possible to have Giardia in a fecal sample, and yet that individual dog will not be susceptible. But it doesn't mean that if that dog doesn't have symptoms of Giardia, he goes and sheds his Giardia organism someplace else, the other dog who's exposed to it, just like with kennel cough, may be susceptible to it because their immune system may not be competent against it, and that dog may get it. So in general, when we find the actual Giardia organism in a fecal sample, we will treat for it. If, on the other hand, what we find is that there's no parasites seen in the fecal sample at all, but we have what we call an ELISA positive, which just indicates that at some point in the past 3 months, that dog's immune system has been exposed to the organism, but probably has mounted an appropriate response and is no longer actively infectious, then that's not necessarily something that we will treat for.
Are there worms that are specifically puppy worms and then grown-up worms? I mean, how many worms can they have?
Lots. And not all of them are pathogenic. Some of them, I mean, we'll have fecal samples come in where people, like my dogs, for example, are around sheep and cattle because they work stock. And so when I run a fecal sample on one of my dogs, I will frequently find sheep parasites in there because they're eating sheep poop. Yes, I know. But he's not actually going to be susceptible to those organisms. The same worms that affect puppies can affect all dogs throughout their life stages, but because their immune system generally learns those organisms when they're young and becomes competent against repelling them, there's worms that we generally associate with being a puppy, like roundworm, hookworm, that we see more commonly because those young immune systems haven't learned to deal with them yet. And that's why at all of the puppy visits, when they're getting vaccines, they get wormed at the same time, all the way up until when they're starting that monthly heartworm prevention and their immune system is becoming a little more competent. Between the boost from that monthly heartworm prevention that helps worm them for those organisms and their own immune system becoming competent, we generally are not as concerned with those worms in adult dogs.
Is it transferable to us?
So there are some parasites that are, indeed Giardia is one of them. All of the intestinal parasites like hookworm and whatnot can infect a human host, but we are what is called an abnormal host. They can't complete their life cycle. They know that we are not a dog, basically. So the people most at risk for being infected by parasites that are common to animals are those who are immune suppressed for some reason. If they're on drugs, anti-rejection drugs for any type of organ transplant, if you have someone in your household who's on chemotherapy, if you have somebody who has a virus that's immunosuppressive, all of those things can lower your immune system's natural ability to fight that abnormal parasite. So in those households, we recommend definitely really vigorous sampling of that fecal sample, definitely that monthly heartworm prevention, probably a good worming once a year, and then everybody who handles, who picks up after the dog, washing hands and just practicing good sanitation.